Alright, we're going to get an introduction to texturing. This is going to be a basic introduction where we're just going to use the Maya Blinn-shader, which is a fairly simple shader. It's just always been around, old school. So what we're going to be doing today is going to be mostly old school techniques. So I would like to point out that for more advanced sort of rendering and any type of surfacing where you're dealing with a more physically based or physically plausible material, a little bit more comes into play because we'd have to talk about linear workflow, and it becomes a little bit different. And the reason I point this out is that I wouldn't recommend proceeding too much with lighting and rendering and trying to make pretty images before you actually have a look at this more physically plausible materials. So this is really just going to be an introduction so that you have been exposed to the various techniques in Photoshop and so that you feel comfortable setting up a Blinn-shader. So that's really going to help you and give you a foundation, like if you want to take this further. So the benefit of using the Blinn-shader is that it's going to give us a very quick update. It's just going to be very nice to view that inside Maya Viewport 2.0. So it's going to use the GPU, and we're just going to get an instant update. So it's not going to be that different from authoring maps for more physically accurate materials, but one main difference is that for the physically based materials, we really have to make sure we follow a linear workflow, and we don't have time to discuss that right now, but also you would think more about the roughness of the actual reflection. Whereas we're just going to be concerned with the color and also something we're just going to call specularity, which is more or less the shininess of the object, whether the surface has a very bright highlights, what we call specular highlights, or whether it's more of a matte type of surface. So that's really going to be the basic control we're going to have to make variation in the reflection. But that's really going to tie in very nicely to the more physically advanced ones once you want to try that. But mainly, it's going to be doing some pretty useful tips and tricks in Photoshop. How to use layer masks. We're going to look at how to make some selections based on colors. Look at the high pass filter, which is going to be useful for creating bump maps. And we're just going to apply various blending modes to fit our needs. And basically just going to give you an introduction of how you might go about setting up a texturing workflow using Photoshop. And yep, so let's just get started with that. So like always, let me just set up a project here. So let's find the path for that. Oops, let's see. And there we go. And let me just save this scene. Okay, so I'm not going to spend any time modeling here. Just going to make a quick polygonal plane. That's all we need. So it already has UVs. We don't have to worry about that. The UVs for the polygonal primitive for the plane is just in 0 to 1 in the UVs. So, but the normal procedure here obviously is that you have some sort of an asset and you have some sort of a UV layout, and this is when you want to export the UV snapshot. So if you're using Maya 2016, you'll find the UV snapshot option should be right here. It's going to be a larger menu, and it should be right here. Okay, so anyways, just be in object mode and go UV snapshot. And I'm setting that to 2K. I'm just exporting a JPEG, and it's going to put it in the images directory of the project. So let's go and find that. It should be in here. So just open that with Photoshop. So let's go to CG textures. It's going to find, if you go to the buildings category, there's a lot of buildings in here. Just going to try to find some old ones, old apartments. Let's go grab this one, just to give us some variation in the texture. not too much, but just so we have can have a little bit more fun with this, right? So usually just grab the highest one and I'll put it in here. Let's see. So let me open the UV layout that we did, and I'm just going to open that in Photoshop. So since I saved this as a 2K image, it's just going to give us a 2048 by 2048 document ready to go. To unlock this layer, just double click it, and I can name it something. Layout, and right. So let's just select. I won't be needing more than this portion right here. So Control C, just going to copy that in here. So that's looking all right. And go to this mode and set this to screen. So I don't really need the layout, obviously, because it's just filling the 0 to 1 space anyways, but just to show you the principle of getting that layout in here. So if you wanted a dark grid pattern from the layout instead, you can invert the layer and then set it to multiply instead. Like if you had a very light texture underneath and it's hard to see that layout. So multiply and all these associated blending modes, they're going to sort of get rid of the white in the image and just multiply the darker elements on top of the underlying image. Screen and these other blending modes will do the opposite. All right. Okay. So, okay, this is it. This is our current Photoshop document. Oh, that seemed to fit quite nicely in here, incidentally. All right. So that's lucky. All right, fine. This is going to be it for the color, but I'm just going to save the actual PSD document, and I like to just store that in the source image directory of the project. So this is going to be example. Just going to call it example and include the layers. So that's where I'm going to be working with all this texturing, always within the PSD document. And whenever I want to save out files to attach to a shader, I'll go and save as, and for this purpose I'm going to be using JPEGs. So a lot of people like to use TIFFs or targas because these are lossless formats. Really, you can get away with PNGs and JPEGs for a lot of different projects. The JPEG compression is really great. I challenge you to see the difference a lot of times from using JPEGs or targas. And JPEGs are used a lot, and PNGs as well. So, not saying you can't use targas or TIFF, feel free, but you don't always have to. I mean, you're not compromising quality. Actually, well, you are, but you can get away with it because the compression is so great. We can't really tell the difference, and you just have much less data to deal with. So this is underscore example underscore color, and we're going to go back to Maya. We're going to create a Blinn-shader and attach to the color node, file node, turn off the filter type, find the example color JPEG, and press number 6 to see the textured result. So there we go. All right, so you can see that even though we have the color in there, if you pay attention to the actual specular highlight, you can see that the highlight of the here is still very uniform. Right, so if we grab the shader and graph the input connections, turn off the color here again temporarily, you can see that the specular highlight is what we're seeing right there. It's from the light source. That's just the default light source that's sort of attached to the camera here. If we're in the shader, we can adjust the specular brightness using the specular color. You can see that make it really bright. You can adjust the eccentricity and the specular roll-off. So now you can really catch that highlight, right? So that's actually not changing even though we're applying this color map. So I can middle mouse button click and drag color to connect it back. I can also drag it if I have the selection, the material selected. I can middle mouse button just drop it over there. So you can see that reflection is actually not changing. Right. So that's what the spec map is for. So that's what we're going to look at now. So I'm just going to copy this. So for all the materials that are not metals, we call them dielectric materials. So that could be, that's what we're dealing with here. We don't have any metals right here. This is, I don't know, some cement and some sort of paint coat on top. And this probably too, some cement, concrete, and wood, and glass. So we don't have any metals. So if you can imagine like a gold piece of gold or copper or a lot of different metals will actually have a colored specular highlight. You know, you can see that golden highlight in the gold. Not the case for non-metals. So we're going to be dealing with a black and white spec map for the most part. So we just try to, you know, Control Shift U and desaturate this, and maybe Control L, you know, go in here and play with the levels, and you know, just quickly throw something out of here. So just for the sake of demonstration, so we'll just example, this is our temporary spec map, just so we have some variation in there. Let's go in here, and this time we'll go to the specular color, and we'll attach our temporary map. So now you can see that's much different. So when I go like that, you can see that there's a variation now. You know, these areas seem to be more bright. They're catching that highlight more than other areas. So to see the effect of only the spec map, because it's going to be kind of hard to see, we can just grab this shader and graph the input connections and just temporarily disconnect the color. Still here, but we're just disconnected it from the material. So right now the only file is going into the specular color. So you can only see the effect it has. So that's pretty interesting, right? To differentiate it, but it's not always going to be this automatic thing where wherever the color is brighter, you would have a brighter specular, right? Because that's what's going to happen if you just desaturate this image. You're going to get brighter areas of specularity because these colors happen to be brighter. Let's take, like, for instance, for the white paint here. You know, since it's a paint, most likely it's going to be a little bit more specular, but also sort of depends on the paint. This looks like an old, sort of weathered and withered away paint, and probably would be quite matte, but probably not as matte as this underlying material. So in this case, maybe it is slightly more specular, but it's definitely not going to be this pure white, which is going to give it just an extreme specular highlight. Right, we definitely tone that down. Now let's look at like this example here. Let's say that the underlying concrete would actually be less specular than the base, or than the paint, right? The coat here. Let's say that, especially if it's like, imagine if it's like some humidity in the air, and this paint could be catching that humidity and causing a bit of a even more of a specular reflection, right? It's kind of a wet sort of look, almost, if you can imagine that. That would be a scenario where if you just desaturate this image, like we just did, so Control Shift U, we're not going to get what we want, because we're going to get less specular reflection here, even though we want more on the paint. So I'm just making the point that you can't always just desaturate the image, obviously, and be done with it. So let's create a scenario now where we want to do just that, what we're saying. We want this color, or I'm sorry, this paint to be more specular than the underlying concrete. How do we do that? So there's a very nice feature in here to make a selection based on color. So incidentally, in this example is a great example for that, because we have this very nice color. Not always the case, obviously. So, you know, let me just show you how I might go about solving that. If I didn't have this great color, you know, I could desaturate it. I could turn the levels you know, increase that contrast, so we really get that contrast between the underlying concrete and the paint. And then I could Control I to invert that. And now we have the beginnings of what could be a map where this paint have brighter specular value than the underlying concrete. But like I was saying, this is actually kind of a nice example to show this filter here. I'm sorry, this feature called select by color range. So because I can sample this color, and this is sort of the fuzziness slider. You can see what it does. It will localize that selection or just gradually blend it out. And I can add to the selection. So if I want to add more hues of that same sort of color, let's just see what it does. So okay, so that's going to give me that selection. So you can see that it actually it's a way of selecting these hues apart from the underlying, which in this case is kind of like concrete, right? And then, okay, so now we have that selection. So what we can do is make a new layer. And whatever your secondary color is here, so we can, down here, we can actually switch between what's the primary and the secondary color. But whatever is currently your secondary color is going to fill this layer if you hit Control Backspace. So I make a new layer, Control Backspace, so you see we have now, this layer is filled with neutral gray. So that's actually a really great way of making these selections, because now I can work with this. I can also select those pixels again very quickly if I control click the layer. So that's going to give the selection back, right? But now I can layer and control D to deselect any selection you currently have. But now I have this one, right? And I can go in here and go control L to go to the levels, and I can sort of make it brighter as I wish or darker, right? So it's a really nice way just to have a control over that. So any brighter areas will, like we were saying, they're going to be much brighter in the specular, and darker towards black, it's going to be very matte. So just going to dial this up a little bit, and let's see here. Okay, let's just try that, and then for this one, let's just desaturate it, and we'll have that underneath just for a quick solution here. I do want to keep some of this variation going on. Just, you know, in CG, oftentimes we can exaggerate things, just make things pop, make it interesting. Sort of what we're doing here. So I'm not paying attention to what's going on in here. Let's address that later. I'm sort of looking at the wall here. You know, maybe this is a bit extreme. I could also dial down the opacity of it. Not sure. Maybe actually we could try to layer on top again this original color layer. It's not going to be colored, but I'm going to desaturate it and see if we can't actually layer that on top as well. Again, just to introduce some variation. So you see that we get that nice variation going on. But then I'd like to only have it so that this layer, I only want sort of what's the same as this selection. So what I could do quickly is just control click, so I get that selection of pixels back. And then I could go, what I do is just click here and I right click to select inverse. So that's going to invert that selection, and I can go delete. So that effectively just deleted the inverted selection, right? So you can see now I have more of that variation here layered on top of the specular layer. So it's a little bit more interesting. But I do want to probably dial both of these a little down. Definitely don't want it to be this extreme. So what I could do, and I just like to show this right now, we also have these adjustment layers. So what I did now is Control L, you know, to control the levels, and I could do that and turn down the brightness here, definitely. But then I'm sort of committing to that change. So if I want to have a control that doesn't go away, that I can keep changing, would be a non-destructive way to do it. I could go here and make a levels adjustment layer. So that's going to affect all the underlying layers by default. You know, so if I turn this down, it's actually going to turn down everything, everything underneath here, except if I hit this button, which is this adjustment only affects, you know, click to the last one, click to clip to layer, basically. So that's what we're doing. So now it's clipping to this layer, the underlying one. So we can adjust the brightness here only for this layer. And then we're not committing to it, so if we, whenever we want to change our mind, just double click here and we're back. We can change it. So for this one we could do the same, but you know, yeah, what the hell, we'll make a lowest adjustment layer for only that layer as well. All right, let's just try this. I think this is probably going to be a little extreme, but let's just see what effect it will have. And let's focus on the window here in a minute. But I want to save the PSD document because this is always where I want to be working, and then I'm going to save out the spec map. I'm just going to do a JPEG and then example spec, and I'll go save and replace. Yes. And back in Maya, what you can do is just right-click the file node and then reload image file. And that's going to reload that spec map. So you see that's what we currently have. And combine that with the color map again. Kind of harder to see, but you know, this is what we get. So now you see, now we achieve that effect that we wanted, where the paint is actually giving us more of a specular highlight, and this concrete is more matte, which is probably a little bit more convincing, right? Don't know. Okay, so let's look at the window. So let's just be content with that for this demo, and we're going to throw all of these, just like shift select all these layers, and we're going to drag them down into the folder. I'm going to call this spec. So this is where I will be working with all the layers for my spec map. Let's pick a new layer, and just for the sake again of speed here, I'm not going to pay too much attention to this. I'm just going to quickly make a selection using just the selection marquee here to do shift select, so I can hold shift right to add to that selection, or alt I can remove from the selection. So shift to add, alt to remove, add in this, and one more, and there. Can't really see it, but I could also have like turned off these layers so I could see what I'm doing, right? So, yep, gotta remove this and add this. So I would have been more precise about this for a production, right? I would have gone in here and actually painted a selection, because you can see that there's actually a very fine, we have some nice details here where the paint is actually covering the glass and so forth. So should we do that? Yes. Okay. Not being very concise here. Let's copy this layer. I'll increase the level so we have much more of a contrast. I think this is going to be fairly forgiving, and I'll try to select again based on color range. You see that I can actually probably get a pretty decent selection here. It's going to be based on this. So obviously there's some cleanup here, but I might not want to use that selection. I might make a new layer, and then I'll go to my paint bucket tool, and I'll just fill in these middle ones that I want to be using, right? So Control D to deselect. So that didn't really work, did it? No. So okay, fine. Actually, maybe we could squeeze this further. Trying to isolate those. Select color range. We'll try this to get a nicer selection here. I don't know if it'll do it. Seems it's going to be a little messy. But you see, it's good in places, in other places not. But I'm going to add to the selection here just to remove these. just kind of want to show you that sometimes you have to spend more attention to these selections in general, like making selections. So these I can leave. And I could have left that one too, right? Because that's a little piece of paint. Probably remove these. What I will be getting at here eventually is that you don't always have to be working in the selections to actually do selections, which is a way to put it. But you can actually just paint colors, and that will effectively be a selection, right? Because you can control-click any layer, and it will highlight those selected pixels. So gotta be careful what I'm doing here. All right, so I'm tired of this now. So for this, let me go to my paint bucket tool, and I will fill in these ones. So this is, see, this is pretty, this is decent. So Control D just to get that selection gone. So you can see that, yeah, I have some cleanup to do here. So I'm just gonna probably just go to my brush and just do a hardness 100, and we'll just paint that in. So now we're painting this selection just using the brush. Right? So I'm not going to spend more time on this, but you get the idea. So this is instead of just relying on these tools, like for the rectangular or elliptical or lasso or polygonal lasso is kind of great though. Right? We could have done that, like gone around with the polygonal lasso, like this. Click, click, click. Even that though, it's not very elegant, right? I mean, Control D to deselect. I think it's worthwhile to see if you can do either like a color range selection, like I did here. It was necessary to actually, you know, increase the levels a little bit. What I ended up doing was actually increasing them and then decreasing them so that I could more easily isolate this color range. All right, and then some touch-up was necessary. But now I have this very nice selection, hopefully. So this is, I can control click it and it will select those pixels. So I can see that I have some unwanted ones here though, so I will actually go in here and get rid of this. So I really don't want this to be anywhere where there's no glass, because eventually what I want to try also is to make an alpha. So I don't want this to be transparent where there's no glass, which is kind of what's happening here. But I can turn on the opacity a little bit again, see what I'm doing. So this, yeah, so this wasn't very successful, but let me just, okay, so don't, I won't spend more time on this, but just quickly get rid of this, some of this. Hopefully you'll understand my point here. And again, just do a selection marquee, just get rid of anything that's going on outside here so that I don't end up with some transparent pixels in my alpha that I will eventually be making. Anyways, let me save the Photoshop document. So this is going to be a handy little map because now I have this beautiful selection. Right now we're going to use it for the spec map though. So I'm going to bring it up. Just get rid of, let me just delete this one again. This is my underlying, this is the actual color. We don't need it for now. I'm just going to put it in a group even though it's just a layer. It's just, to me it's a little more clean, right? So we have the color there, we have the spec here. What's this? It's just a layer, so get rid of that. You know, keep things a little bit tidy. What's this? It's just work in progress, get rid of that. So my current spec map is looking like this. But now we have this on top, which is to control the specularity of the windows. Some mess in there. It's unintentional. Oh, it might just be because... No, it's not. Okay. Alright, that did not intend for this to take this long, but since I've started, I'm going to try to make this pretty. Is this actually due to the color? No. Oh, it's just a variation, right? It's not really giving me okay. I want to make sure I have color in here. It's that selection based on the color range that's sort of yeah, so this is not very tidy. Well, so I would take the time, make this really solid, but I won't bore you to death here, so let me just quickly get this roughly in place. I will, because I will have some gaps in the eventual alpha, because I do want some dirt on top of there. So it's not crucial, but this I definitely want to get rid of, because this, like I was saying, this is going to be causing some transparency where there's not even a window, which is not what I want. Definitely get rid of all this junk. These are like pixels. Oops. All right. Okay, kind of regretting doing this more advanced, or not advanced, but cumbersome selection. But there we have it, and you see it's nice. You know, we have the selection only where there's no glass, and we're going to be able to have a nice control over the spec for the glass. So let's save the document again, and I want to show how you can actually add some dirt on top of here, because I don't want the glass to be completely clean, right? So just to make it interesting again, so what's pretty common to do is to find some sort of a grunge layer and then use the blending modes to put that on top. Let's see, this is for some reason colored. It's not what I want, so let me desaturate it, Control-Shift-U, and now it's not colored. Okay. All right, so a grunge layer could be anything. It could be like rust. You know, you can grab like a rust here. Anything really, anything pattern, any of these patterns. And let's try just that. So let's see what that does. So we'll go and find rust. I do believe I have some rust. Yes. Yeah, this will work. Just to, I guess I could just drag it in there. Okay, so it's a smart object, so I can just decide on the scale, hit enter, and then I have to right click and rasterize the layer. So obviously I don't need the color, so I Control-Shift-U, get rid of that. But I just want to layer this over here to create some interesting variation. And yeah, basically change this, probably try a multiply. Can turn on the opacity a little bit if I want. And that's it. Let me now show the layer mask option, which I guess we haven't talked about yet. So because I can go in here in the eraser tool and start erasing parts of this that I don't want, right? So I can erase this, but I'm sort of committing to that change. So if you want a more non-destructive way of working, here we have the layer masks. Click this button, we get a mask right here. So currently it's white, it just means that it's all there. If it's black, it's all gone. So if I use Paint Bucket and just fill the layer mask, I have to select and be on the layer mask. You see, nothing is there. But then I can go back to the brush and switch this color to white. And if I just paint it in, it's gradually coming back. And you can see that the mask is sort of updating. That's what the layer mask does. So there you go. Right, so that's really it with layer masks. And I can go back again, and I can go do a black color again to remove, and I can lower the opacity of the brush, for instance, and just, so I'm not using the eraser tool this time, I'm just using a standard brush, and painting like black or white. Right, so now we can create some interesting variation. Okay. Yeah, so let's not spend too much time on this. Let me just copy it, and we'll drag one down here, and we'll make some variation so that it doesn't look precisely the same. And let's go black, and oops. So now I'm painting on the layers. I don't want to do that. Undo, undo, undo. You want to make sure to be on the mask, and then that will work as the mask. Paint. All right, I think that will get the idea across. So now, again, let's just get this out of here. We have this nice selection, though, for the window, so I can make a layer underneath this one just to maybe control a little bit these highlights. So if I just fill this layer, let's say with some sort of a solid, just make it gray. All right, so this is underneath, but then I can sort of multiply that on top. So you see I can just sort of dial what we were saying initially about this white paint. We probably don't want that to be just this really, really, really specular. It's definitely we want to keep this variation probably, but this gives us a nice way to just dial that up and down. Just multiplying the solid on top of it, right? Again, non-destructively. We could have done it also, of course, with a adjustment layer or multiple ways of doing things. What's this layer? Seems to be doing nothing. I'll get rid of it. So you see, you end up with a lot of layers. But that's really the beauty of this, because you can keep working, just be creative, keep some sort of structure, but feel free to try things. That's the whole point, and you'll find yourself getting lost and having fun with this. Because now, obviously, again, no matter how complicated this looks, it's just going to be one simple little file when we save it out as the JPEG. So it's all tidy in the end. And in here, again, let's find the spec. Right-click, reload image file. So there you see now we have much more of a highlight where the glass is. Maybe we probably want to exaggerate that a little bit more just for this demo. So I'm going to grab this one, levels, and I'm going to make the glass really bright. JPEG, spec, save, yes. So, with this workflow, which is granted a little bit old school, there's a lot of back and forth going between Maya and Photoshop, but it's not that bad. Sometimes we have to do that. And the very nice thing also with Viewport 2.0, the graphics card, depending on your GPU, but it's going to be able to show you a very nice update here now, so that's great. Okay, so we've done the spec map. I think we just have to call it done. We spent some time on that. And let's just, let's make a simple bump map now. Okay, so for the bump map, this is definitely in a case where we really want to make sure we go in here and we select precisely 50% gray as our starting point. It's very important that it's not roughly 50%, but it needs to be exactly 50% gray, RGB value 128, 128, 128, right? So, and yeah, let's use a paint bucket and fill that. That's going to be our neutral starting point for the bump, or in other words, that's going to be no bump, where it's neutral gray. And then let's just see. We can start building this up again. Let's just go to our spec map. That's where we have all the information. So we're going to make use of the same layers, obviously. So first of all, let's just grab this beautiful selection that we spent some time building for the windows. We can name that if you want. Window matte just like a matte selection of the windows, so we can use for various purposes. That's why, I mean, it's oftentimes worth the effort. Like if we went in here and did a good job with that. Still some unwanted ones here though that we tried to get rid of. Unsuccessfully, it seems. Why is it not responding? Okay, here we go. Take the time here and tidy this up. See all these pixels lying around. Yeah, just do a lasso, or polygonal lasso is pretty good. You can draw these lines, and then double click to finish. Oh, I'm holding spacebar to move around the document. And when I zoom in, I hit Z and just to activate the zoom tool. Forget to mention everything I do. Let's see here. In this case, I might probably be easier to get me out of this one. Rather, we could try to do a magic wand selection on. Not really doing it because it's also selecting these. All right. Use the eraser. Just erasing this away. Okay. Oops. All right. Let's erase this. That. All right. Okay. So whatever is brighter than neutral gray and all the way up to white is going to appear to be bumping out. But we do want the windows to appear to be bumping slightly in, right? I mean, they're probably the lowest ones in our scene, right? So I'm just going to go to levels and just lower them and push those back. We don't have to make them all black, but just slightly darker than the mid-tone gray. Okay, so that's a good start. And I think we did a selection, right, for sort of the window. It's this one. Yeah, so we're just going to copy this. So, and if you place that underneath that layer, there we have that one. And we can also go to levels and just push that back a little bit if you want to. So, let's see. This is typically something that probably, yeah, it depends on the scenario. If you're making a background building or something, you could totally solve this window by using a bump map. So this would be more useful for any sort of background building. Otherwise, you'd probably opt to have some geometry here to actually build a window, right? Just to point that out. So bump maps are typically more for surface details, but you can definitely do build up things like this. So this is a great example also to really understand how bump mapping really works, I think. So this is now multiplied over. Let's see here. I think we might, yeah, we might want to have some variation on top of there eventually, but this is going to be our first pass at this. We're going to throw all these into a group and call this bump. Okay. Great. So now let's see if we can get some variation. So we're going to bring some of this work over that we did for the. We probably don't want that dirt here in the bump. But let's just in the bump, let's make it look like the paint is actually coming up just ever so tiny bit out from the concrete wall, right? So that's, again, taking the time to make these beautiful selections that we also did for the paint in this case, which would be these two layers right here, and just copy all of this, including their adjustment layers. So I just drag them down to this new layer icon, and then I can just hold and drop them in the bump. And activate the bump layer. Right, so just making the point that, yeah, now we see that it's worthwhile doing these beautiful selections because you can use them over and over again for various purposes. But now let me just get rid of all this and Control E just for quickly now for this demo, get these merged together. And what we were saying though is that we want this paint to be coming a bit up. So we're going to go to the levels and we're going to be adjusting this so that they're coming a bit up from the neutral gray. So this is something, bump mapping is definitely a case where you want to be subtle about things. You don't want to over exaggerate. And probably we want to keep some of those details or variations like from this paint also, but we didn't really spend too much attention to that in the spec map. So I'm thinking maybe we'll just grab the original color map into the bump and to quickly select, just get rid of what we don't currently want to see. We can control click this layer which has these pixels, go back here and I go to this tool, right click, select inverse, and I can delete. So I'm just left with this. And we can also subtract the windows from it. So I can control click the layer that has the windows and be on this layer and just delete. So now I'm left with a layer that only has this information. And then I can control shift U to desaturate and play around maybe with some levels here. And yeah, so I probably would have spent some time lightening up this part that's actually in the shadow. I don't want that necessarily to be in the shadow, right? So I could have used, where did they put that? Here, yeah. So like the dodge and burn tool. If you use the dodge tool is pretty great for just, you can see that you can bring the midtones back up. So you can get rid of like shadow areas. And conversely, the burn will do the opposite. We'll take it back down. Because I just want this, I need this variation here, right? I don't want that to be darker. It just happens to be darker right now because it's in shadow, but that's not something I want to be affecting the bump map. So looking at that though, I'm probably going to get rid of this top here just because I don't really have a lot of information there. Anyway, so you know, this would take more time, but for this demo, quickly just want to show, let me just layer this, probably just going to try to multiply. Let's see what we get. So, okay, so this is a good point. By multiplying this down, right, you can see that all the bright levels disappear. What that's going to do in effect when we're doing a bump map here is that it's all these values are never going to go above neutral gray because our underlying image is neutral gray. So by dividing this task up like this, I can say that by multiplying this down, I'm only going to be introducing bumps, bump mapping that actually goes into the surface, if that makes sense. Right? Normal here, I would like be kind of have to worry about two things at once. I would have to dilate so that all these values would match neutral gray. But if I just go to multiply, that will automatically become neutral gray. So if you sample this using this one, point sample, or this eyedropper tool, we can sample this and you'll see that none of these values will go above neutral gray. Right. So that's great. So then I can just make a copy of it so I have it right there. Control L. Let's see if we can make it just a little more subtle. And I'm also just going to lower the opacity on it. I just want a subtle bump that sort of bumps inward wherever this paint sort of has flaked off, right? That's all I want this to do. So, you know, we could keep going with this, and usually, like we've been saying, this is something that requires attention, right, and time. And you have to understand the logic that drives all these maps. One final thing we're going to do though is we're going to just make sure that maybe the frame here extends a little bit outward. Just going to make a final little selection here. Let me just, won't take long to deselect this part. It's a nice little feature. And we'll make a new layer and the bump. We'll just fill that with matte gray. And we'll place that underneath all the other ones, right? So that's sort of underneath there, but it's still going to be, well, this one is going to be brighter, right, than all the rest. So Control L and bring that up, because that's actually pulling out from the surface, right? Sort of like that. And then same thing, I would probably go in here and introduce some of that variation on top again of the bump. So where do we put that layer? Here. Let me just select those pixels and just control click it, and we'll go and grab the color again, drop that into the bump, Control Shift U to desaturate, and I go to this one, hitting M. I'm in the rectangle tool, and I can right click, select inverse, delete. Now we have this copy, but I'm going to put it, yeah, so we can actually extract again, control click this layer and just delete that portion of it, and we're left with only this frame, right? And then I'm probably going to put that underneath this one, meaning that this layer that we actually just made to make this brighter, I'm going to try to screen that on top of this detail. That could be one way of doing that. So you can see that, yes, we're making it brighter, but by using the screen blend mode, we can still see the underlying detail. Right. So if we sample this now, you see we should see values that are above neutral gray, like up here. So these will be the brightest spots, right, in our bump map, which makes sense because they're the ones that are coming the farthest out, like this frame, right? Okay, so just having a look at the final bump map, or at least the version that we're going to try right now. So this is it. Let's just see what we get. So let's remember to save the Photoshop document, and we're going to save. Oh, it's being saved. All right. Have to wait for that. And save as. We'll go and do another JPEG. This time it's going to be the bump. Attach that in here. Bump mapping. So for the bump map, what we're going to get is, again, if you just select the material, graph the input connections, we're going to get one additional node in addition to the file node. This is the bump node, which controls the depth and the strength of the bump effect. But we still need to go to the file node and find the image file as before. So this is the bump. Turn off the quadratic filter. And you can see usually the bump effect, this will also depend on, the render engine or game engine you're using. But typically these bump values are too strong, so I'm just going to dial this down. You can be pretty subtle usually with that effect. Still looking pretty aggressive there. Turn that down, 0.15 maybe. Okay, so we're definitely getting that variation, right? So, but also this would be better with some light direction. So I'm just going to create a directional light. For the directional light, the scale of the icon doesn't really matter, nor the location. It's only really the rotational values that matter. So you can place this icon wherever you want. Hit number 7 to see lit mode, and it's going to do its best using the GPU to light the scene. Yeah, let's see here. So I'm trying to catch like a shadow from that window frame. It's kind of hard to see, but we do see that there's a like a highlight coming down here and a shadow on this side. But let's try to exaggerate that part of the bump map. So this is where naming naming all these layers could be useful. But I'm just going to bring this back up. Probably going to bring the windows a little down. Back in. And also for this one, bring that also a bit back. And see if we can't, I think maybe the effect of this wall bump definitely needs to be subtle. So I might just calm that down. Let's try this. So this is how you have to keep look debbing this using this method, going back and forth, sort of bearing in mind the logic always of what the maps actually do. So that's why this is probably a really good sort of practice way of getting used to the way image maps work. So you can see that we really need to alter the light direction to see the variation in the surface. So when you get more and more into shading and surfacing, what we're doing is we're dealing with surface response. It's the way that surfaces react to light. And when you're dealing with more advanced materials eventually, we really need some sort of environment for the reflections so that you can see something reflected, right? So typically, because this scene is completely empty, there's nothing reflecting in here except the light source. So that's going to be also causing more convincing renders a lot easier. That I'm saying this so that you don't get too carried away with the rendering aspect of this right now. It's really just to try to see if you can get these variations and set yourself little challenges like we just did with the paint. We wanted that to be more specular than the underlying concrete. We spent quite some time getting the specular to work in the windows, also adding some dirt. So you see that it's really kind of working and coming together now. Also gradually dialing the bump so that it's not too aggressive, but it's still doing its job, right? And yeah, this is coming together. So I think we're pretty much done with the basics here that I wanted to show. So now I'm just going to make some maps for fun. Okay, let me just detach the color maps so we can see only the effect of the specular and the bump. You can see that's pretty interesting. Put the color back on. All right, so I think I'm going to do an alpha now. So that's going to be a map where we're going to be able to use to actually have transparency for these windows, including making sure that the dirt here is actually not as transparent. Right, so the transparency map, or we're going to just call it an alpha, it's going to be fairly simple. We just really need the windows, so window matte, but we actually improve the window matte a little during our bump map here. So we're going to copy this one, drag it up here, so, and hide everything else. Let's see, just make an underlying layer here, and that's going to be all white. So everything that's white is not going to be transparent. It's going to be visible. Everything that's black is going to be transparent. So with this map, currently, we're going to just have the windows being transparent, so that's nice. But we're going to add one little finesse here, which would be the dirt on top of there, which we also don't want to be transparent. So again, naming would be nice, but they're right here. I'm just going to copy them quickly and Control E. That's just going to merge them together, and there we go. So if I place them over, granted this is messy now looking at this, that's because we need to have this set to screen, I believe. Yeah. So sloppy brush strokes starting to appear now, but didn't really notice that earlier. But anyways, fine. We'll get the idea here. So we can make it, you know, the brighter they are, the less transparent they will be. Or gradually, you can also make it semi-transparent, right? And we can also add more dirt if you want. Just like go with a low opacity brush. Let's make just one of these standard brushes, but that have a little more variation to it. And just set the opacity here. So, you know, if you wanted to add some smudging, semi-transparent areas, you could do that. Let's try it. Let's not exaggerate this too much. And yeah, save as. Actually, let's just put this in a layer. We'll call this the alpha. Save the PSD and save out the JPEG. So this is not to get confused with an alpha channel that's usually built into, for like formats like targets and TIFFs and PNG, you can store an additional channel in addition to the RGB channels, which is an alpha channel, which is exactly something like this. It's just a map or a layer that's associated with the file that tells various softwares that deals with transparency. That could be Photoshop or Maya or any other 3D software or render or game engine. Where do you have transparency and where do you have opacity? So, and it could be called an opacity map, transparency map, or we can just call it an alpha. So we're just using the word alpha, but that's not to be confused with an alpha channel, okay? Because we're making just a custom alpha map, okay? So that's what we're doing. And let's go here. And that's transparency. It's what it's called here in the Blinn. Same procedure. Attach the file node. Turn off the filter. And example alpha. There we go. And the graphics card here is going to be able to display that. So we don't have anything. Well, we have the grid there, so you can see that. Nice transparency, and also with the variation and the dirt right there. So now all this is starting to really work together to give us a much more convincing result. So we can start graph this again. And we can sort of see color. No, hang on, sorry. What was this? This was spec. So let's do spec color. What I wanted to do, this is the color. Yeah, so we can sort of have a look at, let me just copy this. And we'll copy this Blinn. So a way to copy a material is that you can just Control D, but that's only going to copy the type of material, not all the incoming connections. To copy all of the incoming connections, you can actually go to Edit and Duplicate Shading Network. So then you're going to get just a duplicate of all of this. But here we can do different things. So I'm going to apply this Blinn over here and just detach everything except the color, so we can really sort of see what the difference all these maps are really making. So we just started out with that flat color, and we can see generic type of reflection, specular reflection. And here we really see all these maps start working together. To create something a little more convincing and interesting. All right. So, yeah, I think that's really what I wanted to show. There's one more interesting little map that I'm quickly going to show, which is just what we call you can call it a glow map or an emissive map. I'm going to call it emissive. It's basically just a map that's going to be able to self-illuminate your material. So Control I, I'm going to first I just Control E merged everything, and then Control I to invert, because I just want to do this without spending too much time on this. Let me actually fill this area with black. And then, yeah, so basically just make a quick color, Control U, and I'm going to colorize, make some color here. Let's see, let's increase the contrast. This is a little extreme. But the glow map is just, or the emissive map, it's only going to be as interesting as you can make it really in Photoshop. Maybe let's try to add some directionality to the light. It's going to do gradient. So just going to go from like a black to white, and just go like that, just to add some directionality. So, and I will multiply that down, and I can play around with the levels for that gradient. So you see now there seems to be some sort of light source that's coming from somewhere within the scene, and yeah, could be fiddling around more with that, but let's not, and let's just show you what I mean. So we could save this out as a JPEG, and we can call this emissive, or glow, or incandescence, or all these maps have sometimes different names depending on your naming convention. So here it's called incandescence. So that's basically, it's going to allow the material to become self-illuminating, right? So I can go in here and attach it. Let's see, and emissive. So this yeah, it's not going to work very well in conjunction with the transparency map. We can try it, just leave it like that. And then let's go Alt B, and I can make the background darker. Let's make the light a little cooler and a little darker, so it's like a night scene. So you can see that, that light is now, yeah, it's not working too bad, even with transparency also, right? It's kind of, yeah, self-illuminating. And depending on also on your render engine or game engine, this can actually be casting light in your scene, so that if you have objects or characters or whatever passing in front of your window, they're actually going to be illuminated by this self-illumination map. Right. This is a very efficient little map. So, I mean, we could have also applied this sort of an effect to an actual interior instead. So opting to do something like just an interior cube. Let me get some light in here, more cozy. And for this, we could do, why is this all? Oh, Okay, then we just want to reverse the normals because it's actually inside that we want to see here. Right, so, and then just make some sort of interior. So then for, let's see here, for the Blinn 2, we're not going to be using the incandescence map. We just want to use the transparency map. But then for this guy, we could have applied something like that map. So yeah, without further ado here, let's just, I would have to UV map this, which I won't, but I'll make some automatic UVs. And I'll just put them in that position where those UVs happen to be for the incandescence map in this case, which is where the windows are. Just to give you a very quick and rough idea here what I'm talking about. Or you could opt to obviously place a light source in there, and that would be fine. But in this case, let's try this. So, and make a new material. Just make a blend. And this is where we're going to do no color, probably just going to have incandescence. And this is where that map will be. So we obviously now we wouldn't have to use this specific map, but I just wanted to show you with this using this since we have it there. And let's see. Yeah. Not super pretty, but hopefully you get the idea. So this is, it's going to behave the same way. It's going to stay, obviously, if I turn the lights down. So it seems like now there's an interior in there, right? And this could work, like in a lot of cases. Obviously, we'd spend time UV mapping this and make sure that we have a texture that makes sense. But then to light it, you could opt to do like an incandescence map in this case, or an emissive map in there. So you see we have kind of a convincing illusion that there's an interior in there. Okay, so that's it. All right, so just to wrap up here, I think I just want to show you how you then can just present your file for delivery in this course. You don't really have to do a lit version, so I'm going to delete that light. Let's say this is your asset, which in this case would be a very simple asset, which would not be a passing grade because you're not showing any modeling. But goes without saying, hopefully. But let's say this is the asset. You just show it like this in Viewport 2.0 with all the textures active, and that's fine. And just do hit the print screen button, go to Photoshop, make a new document, paste it in there, and this is fine for your delivery in terms of the beauty render. Just crop it. You don't need all this other stuff, but this is really fine. It's really just showing off technically your asset. You will also be submitting your Maya files, so this is just for the report and for the main image. And then just maintain the same camera position and go show or shading a wireframe on shaded. So it's going to display the wireframe, and you can include the textures if you want on that, but also just do a wireframe on a clay render would be preferable actually. So just that would just show the wireframe, right? And then to show the UVs, you can, if you want, just go in here and do activate this guy. So that's going to just show the checkerboard. And if you had any sort of distortion in the UVs, that would kind of show up here. So this is to show that you hopefully don't have any distortions in the UVs. So just select the object and click Q to go to the selection tool and just move that out of the way and do a print screen. So we have that, and paste that in there. Right? Then we'll have a comparison of all these different, of the wireframe, the UV checkers, and the final textured mode. So in addition to that, I wanted to mention for your report, where you're going to be talking about various technical aspects of your model, what you need to be able to find is under display, heads-up display, poly count. So this will tell you how many faces you have in your asset. All right, that's really just what I wanted to make sure I mentioned for in terms of your final delivery. So we're keeping it very simple. We're not rendering anything. We're just making use of the GPU and the Viewport 2.0. So on the computers in the labs, you'll be able to definitely get a decent result using a standard Blinn and 2K JPEGs or even 4K JPEGs or PNGs should be fine. All right, I thought I was done recording the lecture here, but one thing I forgot that I really wanted to show when I did the bump map is one additional filter called the high pass filter. So I'm just going to add that quickly to the bump map, and we're going to have a look at what that does. So I'm going to copy the color map just into the bump map, just to see if we can get some fine details. So Control-Shift-U, I'm just going to desaturate, and then we're going to go and Other, High Pass Filter. And you can see what it does right away. It's really good at picking out these details, and it almost looks like we get these nice little cavities. You can play around also with this radius, but I'm just going to hit OK. Zoom in here, you can see that it's like it fills these beautiful little cavities, like all these little indents into the surface, like here. And again, if we set this to multiply, we're only going to be pushing in, like these values are never going to go above neutral gray. And then we could play around with the levels, and I could really be left with like these, only these subtle little, like something like this. And we could also have done an adjustment layer for this to have a control over the levels after the fact. But just because I just want to do this very quickly right now, see, we're just left with these beautiful, nice details that would have taken very long if we had to go in there and paint it. And you can see what a great little addition that could make to the bump map, right? Add those little indents. So let's just see what sort of an effect that would do. So JPEG, we're just going to replace the bump. And do I have it open? I guess I closed the scene already. Let's set the project back. So open that back up. And since the paths are all correct, you know, it's all going to the source images directory, and we set the project before they open the scene, everything should just come back the way we had it. So that's great. So let's get rid of this guy. And I'll just go to the non-lit mode. And I guess this is our newly applied bump map, right, that we're seeing the effect of. So yeah, I don't know. Seems a bit exaggerated to me, right? So graph the input connections. I think we're just going to have to go into the bump node in this case and dial maybe the effect down a little bit more. But yeah, I just wanted to show you that at least now we're getting all these little additional indents into the surface. Probably pretty exaggerated, it seems. I would probably maybe consider blurring them ever so little. You know, that could work. And then I'd probably go over, make a mask for it so that we could go and just remove them from some areas and just be left with some areas with more. And in doing that, I would refer back to the underlying color map just to sort of eyeball this. Where would I actually be left with some cavities, which I guess in this case might not be entirely convincing. Maybe here, you know, you just sort of have to go over maybe here, you know, sort of see what you get, right? So, and then remove it from other areas where probably you just want it more flat. And this also just becomes more of a visual and an aesthetic choice, right? Where you probably just want to make sure that your surfaces are, this is just more of a general thing really, but that you don't cover your assets with the same amount of detail. Like you want to create some areas of interest, and then you probably just want to make some areas that are calmer. So it's all about a balance, right? So you're creating some of these areas of interest, and then you're leaving others a little more subtle. Right, so we could still go in here and maybe I'll make a copy of this layer, and this would be a more sort of aggressive version of it. And for this, I don't want this active almost anywhere, so I'm just going to delete this mask. Then I'm going to apply a new mask, which is going to be, I'm just going to Control I to invert that mask back to black. So it's essentially right now this layer is not active, but I'm going to go in and paint just with white brush now, where I would like, this effect gradually to show through. Just make a little brush here, so something like this. If I want to highlight here, and I would refer back to, again, to see really what I'm doing here. It probably helps to have to refer back to the texture. All right. Well, anyways, let's just apply this one, see what we get. Let's do a JPEG and bump map, and all right. Go back to Maya, and we'll go. I can also go in here and hit reload. And yeah, so you see that, I think that's immediately a lot better. So we have some interests, and then we're letting that effect be much more subtle in other areas. So, all right, that's the high pass filter. Just one of those little tricks that can really speed up things here for fine details in bump maps or displacement maps, which is essentially a bump map, but it's used to actually displace the surface. So the thing with the bump map also that we didn't mention is that it's actually not changing the contours of the objects. If we go to the side here, you're not going to see the profile, for instance, of that window frame protruding out. It's still going to be totally flat. It's just going to give you this impression that there's micro detail and variation. See, this effect here is coming together very nicely across the surface here with all these maps now interacting all together. So bump maps are really great for that. But what I was saying with the displacement map, which we won't cover now, that will actually displace the surface, and if we went to the side here, it would actually, we would see that window being displaced out from but technically it's a similar map to a bump map. All right, so let me save the document as well. So that's going to be it. Thank you.